Hello, I'm Hannah Kaplan, and this is the WCS Wild Audio Podcast, where you'll find reported audio stories covering the latest news and newsmakers from the Wildlife Conservation Society's Global Conservation Program, Zoos and Aquarium, and their many partners. We've got a great show today, so let's get to it. The Bronx Zoo's herpetology team cares for a number of venomous snakes at the zoo's World of Reptiles. As professionals, they know what they're doing. Just in case, though, the zoo team keeps antivenom on site and a thorough plan in place to address any potential emergencies. Fortunately, it hasn't been needed on site. Instead, that antivenom and the team are helping to save lives outside the zoo through an impactful partnership. Dan Rosen has the story.
If you just kind of look down the back here, this is the service area for all of the exhibits on the public floor.
Kevin Torregrosa is curator of herpetology at WCS's Bronx Zoo. Recently, he took WCS Wild Audio on a tour of the zoo's World of Reptiles. In the back, he showed us a long hallway with doors to the various animal enclosures along the left wall. Each is labeled with a colored ID card.
If they're pink or red, that indicates a venomous snake. Non-venomous snakes have white tags.
Each ID tag also has a number.
So that corresponds to the antivenom for that snake. So for any snake in the collection, we maintain a stock of non-expired antivenom to treat our staff in the event of an emergency.
That stock is kept in a nearby refrigerator. If someone's bitten, the antivenom would go with the victim to the hospital, so it could be administered via an IV. There are also emergency buttons along the wall that alert staff and security in the event help is needed.
The good news is we haven't had an emergency, certainly in modern history, where we've had to deal with that, but we always keep it as a just in case.
This safety system began over 100 years ago after a zookeeper at the Bronx Zoo was bitten by a rattlesnake. Now, Kevin says, it's standard practice for any zoo keeping venomous snakes to have treatment on hand. In the 1980s, the Bronx Zoo also began a partnership with nearby Jacobi Medical Center. That's where Dr. Josh Silverberg works.
My name is Josh Silverberg. I'm an emergency medicine doctor over at Jacobi Medical Center. Some of my roles include I'm the director of our Snakebite treatment team, and I'm the director of undergraduate medical education for our Department of Emergency Medicine here.
Today, Dr. Silverberg and his team are available to help out the Bronx Zoo herpetology team in the event of an emergency. The zoo team also supports the medical center when members of the public turn up to the hospital for help with snake bites. Dr. Silverberg says this can happen 10 to 15 times a year.
Generally, the way it works is when someone is bitten by a venomous animal, they usually contact the local poison control center, or the hospital that they go to contacts the local poison control center. Based on that, they figure out what antivenom they need sometimes, or sometimes they just call us directly and ask us for advice. Our local poison control center has a tendency of calling me when there is a issue or concern. Not just for the hey, let's give this an antivenom, but just because in my role I have a lot more experience with dealing with snake bites, particularly the exotic variety. A lot of those aren't so common, so a lot of people have had minimal experience with that.
When it does happen, Dr. Silverberg then turns to Kevin and his team for support with antivenom.
I can honestly say that within the past year, the antivenom from the Bronx Zoo has saved a patient's life. We shipped antivenom off to another hospital that I cannot get into specifics about, but as the antivenom arrived, the patient was having significant neurologic dysfunction, and he was really in trouble, and the antivenom significantly turned him around. There is almost no question in my mind that if he did not get that antivenom, he would have had a hard time surviving that. Fundamentally, this is a service that the Bronx Zoo is providing for the whole surrounding state, and thousands of miles around. So they get it to protect their own, but because their own know what they're doing, they don't get bitten, and it is the surrounding community that really benefits from it.
Ultimately, Kevin urges everyone to think responsibly before keeping venomous reptiles.
A lot of people who keep these animals privately don't keep antivenom, and they're basically relying on zoo inventory or someone who happens to have this antivenom to provide that in the case they are bit. Ideally, anybody keeping venomous snakes should have a plan in place, whether that's keeping their own antivenom or an understanding with someone who's keeping their antivenom that in the case of an emergency, this is the stock that they're going to use.
Dr. Silverberg feels this type of responsibility is best left to people who undoubtedly know what they're doing.
When people are asking me if they should own a venomous animal, my response is, if you're asking the question, the answer is no.
For WCS Wild Audio, I'm Dan Rosen.
Today's episode was produced and reported by Dan Rosen, with help from Hannah Kaplan and Nat Moss. The WCS Wild Audio podcast is a production of the Wildlife Conservation Society. Stay tuned for our next episode, and don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts.